Hey there, my friends. I have a new video for you today. This will be relatively brief, but I have been wanting to get back to making some educational stuff or some useful tips and techniques kind of stuff. And so I have one for you today. And this was initially going to be a series of videos, but it actually turned into something else. It turned into probably what will become my kind of introduction to tarot, my tarot foundation course that folks have been saying, hey, will you try to ever do this? And I was like, I don't know that I know how to make that happen. But I do now. So we're going to do it. So this won't be a series of videos. There will be a class of some kind down the road. I'm not sure whether it will be live or pre-recorded or what, but I have exciting ideas for that. What I want to talk about today is the idea of the image, and this is something that I've had a few videos about in the past. I've made a video a few years ago called There Will Be not There Will Be Clouds, There Will Be Blood, called There Are Clouds. And it talks a lot about the card I'm going to talk about today as an example, because it's one of the prime examples of what this is, of what I'm trying to sort of get folks to think about. And I talked about the Ten of Swords. And the kind of purpose of that video is united with this one, and even one I made a few weeks or maybe a month ago about the idea that the image is not the card. And I think, you know, when I say things like that, people kind of get anxious because, like, well, the image isn't the card. What is the image? Well, it's a tool. It's a tool. It's one of the tools that we have to read with. But it's not the only one. And the image is a complicated thing. And, you know, I want to sort of start by admitting that, like, I have a fair knowledge of tarot history. I've done my homework. I've studied these things. And so, you know, when we're looking at Pamela Colman Smith's images, you know, we are looking at a specific thing. You know, there was an aim here. She was illustrating the Lord of Ruin, which is the esoteric title for that card. So that's what the card means. Except that that's not always what the card means, or it's not the totality of what the card means. It's part of the card, for sure. This matters to new readers, I think, maybe more than people who have a system, because there are times where you're gonna ask a question, like, what should we do to celebrate my partner's birthday, right? And you pull the Ten of Swords, and you're like, oh, should we, like, kill each other? Should we break up? Like, should we end it? Like, what does that mean? What do we do? What do we do as a reader when the card seems incongruent with the question we're asking? Now, maybe the best thing for the relationship at a certain point is that it ends. You know, that there are times in relationships where, like, that's just the tea. But that's, you know, that's not an ideal answer to a question about, like, what should we do to celebrate a birthday? So, and there are many times where that happens. You know, you might ask a question about, like, what's wrong with my relationship? And you pull the Two of Cups. There are just times where the question and the card seem incongruent. Now, one solution to that is to read with 3 cards, always, which I recommend. It comes from Robert M. Place's Tarot History, Symbol of Divination. I talk about it all the time. It was life-changing as a reader, and I never read with less than 3 cards per position. But even if you have 3 cards, sometimes there's an incongruence that a card will deliver. Oftentimes there's really interesting tension in a reading when the cards don't seem to come together, but that's a video for another time. When we learn tarot, what most of us do is we learn a series of meanings and commit them to memory. And that's how you start. That's the foundation. And a lot of times, you know, the meaning is heavily influenced by the image, right? You know, it's so striking. How could you not find this indelible? You know, I mean, I'm looking over there because you're here and I'm there. You know, it's indelible. Like, how many versions of this card are there in the world, or adaptations of this are there in the world where, like, it's this, you know? And there was a particular aim. So there are times where that is what the card is, that's sometimes things just are what they are on the surface. But what I really encourage folks to do, especially when they're stuck or when a card chosen for reading doesn't seem to match the question in some way, is to really just sort of forget everything we've been told, everything we memorized, everything we learn about the image, and start with just what we see, and not what we think we see, not what we've been told we see, not what emotional reaction we're having to the image, what we literally see. I always say this, well, I don't always say this, I've started saying it more and more, that, tarot as a drawing, as an image, is art. And as such, it has an emotional impact. Art is not subjective. Art is, art is not objective. It's totally subjective. It's totally about emotion. By the same token, tarot has to be, or start from, something other than subjectivity or emotion in order for a reading to emerge. Because if we judge everything before we start to work with it, we're jumping to conclusions and we may miss something, or we may get stuck, which is sort of what happens in this little scenario where we say, what should we do to celebrate my partner's birthday? So literally, what do you see when you look at the Ten of Swords? Literally. And in so doing, what I really want to do is avoid any judgment language. So you might say there's a body that's been stabbed. We don't know how this body got this way. Someone had to put them there, but there's a body. There's a body, there's a beach, there are swords, there is water, there is sky, there are mountains, and then we can get a little more specific. The sky is black and yellow, the water and the mountains are blue, the swords are inserted into the body, and the body lies on the beach. All of that it's not judgmental. It's not judgmental language. It's just sort of stating what we see. Very, very, very flatly, without a value. Now, maybe, it's hard to imagine any scenario in which this mofa wasn't stabbed. But that's not the purpose of this right now. The purpose is to see beyond that and to not make assumptions about it, to not assume that that's what we're seeing. When we take it apart that way, then we have an image that is very, very neutral. And that's one of the things I love about Pamela Coleman Smith's artwork, is that it's shockingly neutral when you get past the things that it was intended to show you, which is a weird thing to say, right? In many ways, this is kind of counterproductive, intuitive, because this is what the card was meant to mean to the Golden Dawn, but I don't care about the Golden Dawn. I care about getting a good answer to my question. So now we have all these pieces of the card, right? We have a body on a beach. We've got swords, or even sharp objects, if we want to get even more general, which is kind of a good thing to do. Sharp objects in the body. And then we have a sky, we have a beach, we have mountains, we have water. So now I return to my question. And the question is, what should we do to celebrate a birthday? So if I just look at the image very, very neutrally the way I just did, I've got body, beach, sharp objects. I get now a different sense of what this could suggest in terms of answering the question. So now what I see is bodies on a beach. I see people outdoors on the water. And I see sharp objects. And I think, okay, stabbing each other on the beach is probably not a great birthday present. But what can the metaphor be? What could this represent? And then I think of acupuncture. And so now I see a different story in this card. A dramatic image, to be sure, but now I see people getting spa treatments or acupuncture on a beach in a resort. You know what I mean? And suddenly the story of the image changes. And now I have an answer to the question that makes sense. I should have pulled out the Two of Cups, and I didn't, because we can do that as an example too, because that's a more positive card. But do you see what I did? It's a little bit like playing mental gymnastics, but it really does work, because everything an artist puts into a card is an emotional thing. Everything we think we see when we look at a card is an emotional thing, because it was designed to tell us something emotional, and yet it doesn't have to do that, because the purpose isn't necessary. The purpose of a reading isn't necessarily to generate an emotion, it's to get an answer to a question. So let's find the Two of Cups. I mean, just while it's in front of me, the three I talked about. I talk about this in my new book. The Three of Swords is a shockingly neutral image when you look at it. It's not a human heart. The background is literally a neutral color. This could be the cover of a rock album, or it could be a poster on a teenager's wall. You know what I mean? Like, this is a very, very neutral... It's not a storm, it's just rain. You know, there are clouds here too. When you look past what you think you see, and you take the image and deconstruct the image, you can get answers that you wouldn't otherwise have gotten, because you're taking out the emotional stuff, and even the intent of the creator, which I don't think is a bad thing, because I always say tarot is a functional art. You know what I mean? It's an art, it's beautiful, we have so many beautiful decks. At the same time, it's a functional art. It's meant to achieve something. So I found it. Let me just tidy up. Two of Cups. Everyone knows this image. So again, so where are we? I hate doing this. So now we went back to another example I said earlier, like what happens if this is an answer to a question of what's wrong with my relationship? Well, I can, again, dissect this image in a very neutral way. There's the medical symbol, the caduceus, I think. There are two people moving with cups. Now, we assume they're coming together, but that doesn't mean they're not backing away from each other, right? So we have two people walking, facing each other. We have ground, we have mountains, we have no sky, really, no sort of weather of any kind. So, and we also have one person reaching out to take, or reaching out. You know, so do you see how I said reaching out to take? To take was a value judgment. That was an assumption. The person is reaching out. I don't know what it's there to do, why they're doing it. I'm just going to turn this around. You know, and we can even talk about gaze. You know, the long-robed figure is sort of looking at the cup. And the short-robed figure is looking at the long-robed figure. So there's eye contact there. So now, if I take this image apart and I think about it in terms of, like, this is a card that's usually about unions. And even when you work numerology, 2 has an attraction to it. It's magnetic. But think about this. Magnetism attracts and repels. You know what I mean? Because the polarity of a magnet will affect whether it's coming together or being pushed apart. And so, you know, I could read this many ways based on that, which is another reason why it's helpful to have more cards for context. But what's wrong with the relationship? Well, one person may be reaching for things that's not theirs. They could be presenting to the world an image of a union, but in fact, they're slowly backing away from each other. And one of them, the one who's looking at the cup in the long robe, is like, don't take my shit. And the other person's like, I'm just going to do this really subtly so you don't notice. So there's a lack of trust. There's maybe a greed among one of the members of the relationship. And they're not moving towards each other. They're moving away from each other. And then even the medical symbol might suggest that they need some kind of professional intervention if the relationship's going to survive. So again, and that was just something I did really quickly, but when we take our value judgments, when we take our assumptions away from the card, and we look at what's literally in front of us without projecting what we think we see or what we've read, we can take the card apart, say, okay, I see two people walking. Each has a cup. One reaches. Then I can kind of retell the story of the image in a way that neutralizes it and then allows me to recontextualize it in terms of a question I'm working with. So when there's a gap between the question and the card, you can take the card apart without destroying the image and understand and look at the story of the image, the narrative or the myth of the image in a different way. And so when you get stuck, that's a really helpful thing to do, because oftentimes we do jump to conclusions. It's a very human thing to do. And if you've been reading for a while, you've probably studied the art for a while, and you know what the intentions were, and you know what the Golden Dawn says the card means, and you know what the authors of the book says the card means. But it doesn't always mean that. And that's when I say these sort of iconoclastic things like the image isn't the card. What I want to help people do is see beyond that, to see beyond the image. Yes, the image is gorgeous. Yes, it's helpful. Yes, it's part of the card, but it's not the card. because even when we're working with the image primarily or principally, we're still making assumptions about it that come from conclusions that may or may not be true, and that may or may not be helpful in terms of answering this question for this parent in this moment. So don't be afraid to take the card apart that way and deconstruct it. Just say what's really there rather than what you think you see or what you've been told you see. And once you neutralize those things, you can put the story together in a way that tells an answer to the question, or helps you achieve an answer to the question. So I hope that's helpful. It's nice to kind of get back to these sorts of readings. Like, again, not readings, these videos. Again, I was like, oh, this is going to be a series. And then I realized this is actually a class that I've unlocked. So, oops. But yeah, I hope you're doing well. Be good, stay healthy, take care, and we'll talk soon.